for session number 2, which will be delivered by Tim Fitzpatrick from Australia, titled The Carol Nexus. Recent yDNA analysis confirms the historical and geographic connection between 3 Ossorian surnames, being Brennan, Costigan, and Fitzpatrick. Applying the 3 disciplines of history, geography, and yDNA testing to demonstrate that they buttress a nexus which is strong enough to resist attempts to separate any one of these surnames from a group that they form. This also shows that the nexus of these 3 names is in fact Irish in origin and does support an orthodox view, challenging more recent theories. Hello, Tim. Good morning. Tim is going to be giving his presentation on the Carol Nexus, which deals specifically with the grouping of surnames from Ossorian, Brennan, Costigan, and Fitzpatrick. So Tim, whenever you're ready, you can take it away and make sure that you are unmuted so we can all hear you.
Yes. Can you hear me, Ryan?
Yes, we can hear you. Yep.
Fabulous. And Peter, you can see the screen?
Yep, you got full screen.
Fabulous. Here we
Very
go. Thanks for the opportunity to present today. And I'm very excited to do that. And also thanks to everyone for being here, and thanks to the presenters before. So here we go. What I thought I might do just quickly is introduce myself. And I'm a pharmacist, and I've been doing genealogy for quite a few years. I started because my 2 aunts got me interested, and the only piece of information that we had was one word, Klapuk, which turned out to be a townland, which is very interesting considering our previous talk. And that was the one piece of information that allowed us to get back to Ireland and northern Kilkenny. And we connected with Fitzpatricks, who still own that farm, and they're our 3rd cousins. So it was fabulous to be able to see where our ancestor came from. And I just have a shout out to my brother Michael. He's here today. So let's get going. On this next slide, I've gathered this data from the Reverend Father Shearman, and I've started with Carol, and that's very interesting for an Australian, perhaps the people from the United States. But when I first saw that, I was saying, I don't know what I was saying, but now, thanks to Ryan, I pronounce it correctly, and that's Carol. So these 2 here on this line are the sons of Carol, and Brennan, as a Christian name, was the beginning of the Brennan sept, and it's important to note that it was O Brennan, so it's missed a generation, and the O is referring to Brennan. And it means, as everyone will probably know, that O apostrophe is grandson of. So on the other side, we have Giolla Phádraig, and that's the beginning of the Mac Giolla Phádraig line. And further down, we get to Costigan as a Christian name, and he was by that time using Mac Giolla Phádraig as a surname. And so in this instance, Costigan becomes Mac Costigan, and today anglicized in the spelling that we see there. And then the Magilla Phádraig line continued down to Brian Og Magilla Phádraig, and in Reverend Father Shearman's Ossorian genealogy, this Brian becomes number 95. And we'll just take note of that, because that gives us 21 generations between Carol and Brian, who becomes the first Baron of Upper Ossory. So what we see here is that historically we've got three important surnames when it comes to the Fitzpatricks of Ossory. That's Giolla Phádraig, Brennan, and Costigan. And historically, they're well noted. There's lots of information about them, and that's really the first plank in the connection between the history, the geography, and the yDNA, as we'll see. So this is just a bit of a summary of that slide. One of the interesting things with regard to the history is that William Marshall was the lord in Kilkenny. He built the castle, and very early on, after the Norman invasion, the Giolla Phádraig sept was outlawed, and there's also good documentation historically that from around Kilkenny City, and which was the seat of their power, they moved to Upper Ossory, which is now County Laois, and that began pretty soon after the Normans began to take over in Kilkenny, which was basically Ossory. The other interesting point is that Brian, as a Giolla Phádraig, felt a lot of pressure from the Ormond butlers and the Kildare Fitzgerald political groups. And so in 1537, he was one of the first of the Irish septs to submit to King Henry VIII, and then he was reallocated his lands, and so that's where he became the first Lord of Upper Ossory, and so this is just more ballast in the historical content about these three names. The other interesting point about this is that the Anglicisation of Giolla Phádraig didn't occur until after a submission to King Henry VIII. So this is just a quick little look at one of the charts that was produced by Father Shearman, and I looked at this, and there's so much data there that I decided that I'd use some software that a lot of genealogists use called Family Tree Maker, and it was so that I could organize this data and produce reports and manipulate it. And my original idea behind that was to look at Dervines. And if you're not familiar with what a Dervine is, it is a group of family males. It could be 5 generations, 4 generations, or 3 generations, from which or from whom the lord or the chief, or whatever name they used, depending on how powerful they were, that from that group, the next chief might be selected. Could be the oldest one, it might be the youngest one, and they had to satisfy a few things about being powerful, being wealthy, being skilled militarily, and being skilled in politics. So I thought I'd like to see if I could produce some Dervines of some of the, not the main lines, but some of the other clans, and see what might have happened to them. So there's a lot of data in this. It looks, anyone who's done research will know that Father Shearman has put a lot of effort into this. So then, whoops, oh, that's my family. I just thought I'd better show you my 6 children. And I note that Ryan's catching up to me, and that's very good. Thank you, Ryan. And a proud father. I've got an economist here I've got an occupational therapist. I've got a pharmacist who is now a partner with me in my pharmacy. I've got a dietitian who is doing a PhD in macular degeneration, a midwife very soon to be finished, and this young one here, she doesn't know what she's going to do. Hopefully she'll stop spending my money at university and become a speech therapist. And here's me with my lovely wife, many years, and she's very long suffering, and she pays all the bills when I start buying books on genealogy. All right, so back to the presentation. This is a report from Family Tree Maker, and I put some blue dots on people of interest. This is Carol. This is Kellock, his son, and over here we've got Brennan. Ryan's currently hiding that one, and then down here we've got this Brennan line down to Costigan. So we had Carol. He had a son, Kellock, who was king of Ossorian, and then the grandson of this chappie became, he was Giolla Phádraig, and then we have Giolla Phádraig. So just a bit of interest, the way that the names went down is if you were the son of Mac, the son of, in that first generation, it was in lowercase. Then if that was to be established as a surname, in the next generation, it became a capital MAC. And so that was when it was established as a surname. And of interest is that Giolla Phádraig was established as a surname very early on, probably in the late 900s. And then we get down here to Costigan, and he, by that time, was using the surname Giolla Phádraig, and as we know, became Costigan. Now, this is not very clear, and so I started reducing the numbers of people in each generation, and we can see here a bit better that we do have Carol, we've got Kellock, and we've got Dermot here, was another son of Carol, and he was vying politically to become the head of the sept, and he actually assassinated his nephew, who was the son of Brennan. And I'm going to draw your attention back to the O Brennan, because Brennan didn't originate with the assassinated son of Brennan. It was O Brennan, and I think that's going to prove to be critical when we do a bit more research, because it's referring back to Brennan, and it's not referring to Brennan's son, who was assassinated by Dermot. But here we can see a bit better that we've got Giolla Phádraig here, and he's the originator of the Giolla Phádraigs. And as I mentioned before, that's in lowercase, and then, well, it should be in uppercase here, but it might take a couple of generations and then it becomes uppercase. And then we have the Costigans there. So this is just another chart of that. So that is establishing the link between those three Ossorian surnames of Brennan, Costigan, and Fitzpatrick. And the other point that I should make is that Costigan established itself as a surname well and truly before the Normans came into Ireland, and no, I'm wrong there. It happened in the 1200s. Sorry. No, I've lost my train of thought there. I'll leave that. I'm not quite sure where I was going with that one there.
I think you meant to say
go on, Ryan.
sorry to interrupt you. Brennan was
You're right.
established before the Normans, and Costigan was established afterwards.
After the Normans, correct. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. All right, so let's move on to some geography. And some points of interest here is that land ownership indicates long-term settlement, and it's surprising how often it is that people stay in the one location. So names become associated with them, with their surnames. And interesting too is that with male inheritance goes the land, goes the yDNA, and also goes the surname. So it just demonstrates that these names will stay in a district for a very long periods of time, hundreds of years. So we know the Costigan is in Upper Ossory, mostly Leash as it is today, and there's Costigans in Kilkenny and Tipperary. Brennan as a surname is more widely distributed throughout Ireland, and similarly with Fitzpatrick. When we reference Lysart, he has 5 septs of Brennans, and so that explains their distribution more widely than just in Ossory. Fitzpatrick is different. There's really just one reference to them. There are some other references, but not a great deal. And the 3 surnames, when they're connected, they only have a high prevalence in and around Ossory. And the geography, as we'll see in the next slides, supports the fact that that Shearman has shown in his genealogy is the very same thing. So, and I've just touched here again that Costigan predominates in Upper Ossory, and that fits with the fact that the Giolla Phádraig were outlawed by Marshall and their flight to Upper Ossory. And the other thing about this is that Brennan, because Brennan originated well before the Normans came to Ireland, they weren't caught up in Lord Marshall's edict of outlawry, and the Brennan sept predominates in Kilkenny more so than in Leash. And some of these next slides will demonstrate that there. And I'll give some acknowledgement to Barry Griffin. He's got a beautiful website. It's open source, and his data comes from the 1901 census. He's got different types of maps, but these 3 maps here are land owning maps. So you're not in this census unless you were the holder of land. And so here we see the Costigans are very centered around Leash as it is today. And this is Kilkenny proper where my cursor is, and this is Leash here. The Brennans are more widely distributed throughout Ireland. Here you can see the outline of Kilkenny a lot better, and you can see Leash there. And so Brennans are predominantly in the northern part of Kilkenny, and I can attest to that, having Brennans in my family tree that come from Castle Coma and Muckalee. And thirdly, we have the Fitzpatricks, which are widely distributed throughout Ireland, but here in Leash there's a concentration. So they're the 3 names dealt with separately. And this next couple of slides will be courtesy of Robin Spencer, who's got a fabulous website tracking back, and he's got lots of different tools on his website. But this particular one will allow you to put in surnames and gives a map that shows where they are highest in concentration. So we've got Brennan, Costigan, and Fitzpatrick. This is at a higher level, and so we're strongest over the southern part of Ireland, and the same surnames at a finer grain. And what we see is the Costigan in orange and Fitzpatrick and Brennan, and they're only showing up in this particular part of Ireland. And if I can go back, that very, very much shows us that when you combine Costigan, Brennan, and Fitzpatrick together, they will only be in this particular part of Ireland. So the next slide also then gives us from the same data. I should have mentioned before that the databases that Robin Spencer uses is the Griffith valuation for Ireland and the 1881 census record for Great Britain. So here we have at the top, Laois has the greatest predominance of those three surnames in combination: Kilkenny, Carlow, and Tipperary. There's a smattering of Costigans over there. So none of these other counties will have Costigan, but they you can see that there will be Brennan and Fitzpatrick combined together. Now, this is just a geographic representation. There's no indication here of any kindred connection between these different surnames when they're even in this data here, even in Laois. So just let me catch up on my slides to see if I haven't missed any little piece of data that I wanted to let you know. So before I move on to the next slide, I hope that I'm not going through this too fast, because there's a lot more in it than just these slides are showing. I will put a link up to the full article that I wrote on the list later, hopefully, if that's allowed, Ronan and Ryan. But to summarize just to this point, I hope it's clear that we can see that the history has placed these three Ossorian surnames well and truly in Ossory, and then post the Norman invasion, or the welcoming of the Normans into Ireland, because they're very welcome now and they're more Irish than the Irish, so it's said. That the history placing them in Ossory, and the geography is placing these three surnames in Ossory. And so now what we'd like to do is bring in some DNA and see if we can show that in Laois, in Kilkenny, these surnames are kindred and they share male yDNA. Before I jump in per se, I just wanted to show you, recently I went to a project of Family Tree DNA called FGC 5494, and it's my group, it's Ryan's group, and what we would call the Ossory group. It's sometimes also referred to as the FGC 9,4 DNA group. So what we've taking out of this line is that where my cursor is, if it's available to people to see, that this DNA group were in the British Isles at a very early stage. We're talking pre the birth of Christ at this level here. If we track down this line here, we come to a SNP, and I hope I'm not using terms that are unfamiliar with people, but a SNP, I hope my cursor's back. Curse my cursor. Is this SNP here is A1487, and it's important from the aspect that we can see that it's well and truly in Ireland. And just take note of this particular part of the tree when we get a bit deeper into things. Now, this tree has been put together by a chappie called Tiger Walsh. I don't know where he gets the time. He is involved in so many family projects or group projects at Family Tree DNA, and he produces these type of charts for most of the projects he's involved in, and he does it via the reported earliest known ancestor that the members of the project will notate. So we can take it with a grain of salt, but what I'm really taking out of this is that this group was in Ireland or in the Isles for a very, very, very long time. And part of what we will get to at the end, we'll summarize. The other part to take out of this is this SNP here, A1487, in combination with a STR, and we'll get into what they are a little bit later, DYS390 returns a value of 21. So that STR value does not exist prior to this point here when this SNP mutation occurred. All right, I've probably dwelt on that a bit too long, and I'm sorry if it's a little bit boring on that sort of thing, but it's going to be very important. So what we hope to show with the DNA analysis, and I have a ribbon across here, but what that should say at the top there is short tandem repeats. So we're going to be using some of these terms a bit, and that's often referred to as STRs. The next one, single nucleotide polymorphisms, quite often referred to as SNPs. And then the next thing that's going to be drawn in is surname matches by group. I've covered this off. That's this SNP here, A1487, in combined with the STR DYS390 returning a value of 21 is going to be very, very rare. And we know that this particular SNP, this particular STR with this value of 21 is rare, courtesy of a chappie who's done great work called Leo Little, and he's gone through and assigned a probability or the frequency with which these STR values occur. So to find this value is rare, one in 100, or less, a higher, less probability than that. Then with our Ossorian group, there are two other STRs, DYS495, returning a value of 9-9, and YCA II returns a value of 2223. These are also occur after this SNP mutation occurs. So I've spent a lot of time trawling through different projects at Family Tree DNA. They can be geographic one, they can be projects by country, e.g. the Island Project, probably now today must have about 10,000 people in it. Surname projects, I've been through the German project, the French project, the Norman project, the Swiss project, the Cumberland project, the Great Britain project, you name it. I've trawled through looking for instances of DYS 390 returning a value of 21. And I can tell you, they just aren't there. And for me, this is another indication that this fingerprint for DNA is Irish. So we will find people whose surname is not Fitzpatrick that have the fingerprint that I'm referring to here. If you can go to the surname projects that their surname would show in that project as an outlier. His DNA fingerprint or his DNA characteristics will put him aside from the main modal haplotype or the fingerprint that is particular to that surname, and also the geography of that surname when we want to look at that. So then I've got some tables I'll talk to you later about that. And I would like you to take interest in another SNP, which is A1506. And we'll see that the data I'm suggesting is showing that SNP is a bridge between Costigan and Fitzpatrick as one branch and Brennan on the other side. And so what I didn't say before with regard to Father Shearman's genealogy and me initially looking to use the data to produce Dervines is that I started to see a pattern with regard to the blue dots and their positioning in the genealogy. And that led me to think, I've seen it before, and hopefully you'll see what I've had seen when I realized it was showing up in the DNA as well. So take note of this as well. We have from Shearman 21 generations from Carol, and thanks to Steve Zaleski, who's here today, and to Ronan Fitzpatrick, who's here today, and their great work in producing the genealogy of the Lord of Upper Ossory and the first Baron. We know that there's approximately 14 generations from the Baron down to today. So that'll give us 35 generations from Carol down to today. And it's not unfair to assign 30 years per generation. So we're coming to the SNP again. And under that, from that SNP down to today, there are 16 SNPs. Dennis Wright, we'll talk about him later. He's an administrator of a project at Family Tree DNA called L226. That's the name of a SNP. And there are a lot of people in that project, and his experience in mathematics has allowed him to assign a mutation rate for the SNPs of 69 years. So that's where we're going. We're going to try and assign an age to this SNP, and we're going to prove with the DNA that these three Ossorian surnames, Brennan, Costigan, and Fitzpatrick, not only historically occur in Upper Ossory, in history and in geography, but they are kindred through yDNA. So the first part of that is with the approval of 3 testers at Family Tree DNA. They've allowed me to show their data. There's Fitzpatrick, Brennan, and Costigan. Now we can see a bit better these short tandem repeats STRs. This particular one here, returning a value of 21, is very, very rare. And this STR, DYS 459, that is rare. It's more likely to be 9-10. And here, YCAII returns a value of 22-23. Now, more characteristically, that would be returning a value of 21-23. How do I know that DYS 390 occurred after the SNP A1497? Well, if you want to go, if you had the time, and you can go to Family Tree DNA and go into the FGC 5494 project, you'll see the haplotypes and the values returned for these markers. They only occur at the point after the SNP A1487 mutated. So these 3 surnames are connected with very rare pieces of fingerprint of DNA, and the other thing about these 3 individuals is that we know historically that they come from the correct part of Ossorian. Now, calcicoma is not in leash; it is very close to the boundary, the border between Kilkenny and leash. This Brennan is related to me and comes from this particular area, and this Fitzpatrick obviously is returning Ireland. And just as an aside, if you are doing your DNA testing, if you can put in information, as granular information about your geography, and as good an information as you can put in about your earliest known ancestor, it just makes life so much easier when you look at this, for example. That's good with time and with geography. We'll go on to these charts. These charts took a long time to produce. It was they're finalized in May 2020. At that particular time, I was a co-administrator of the Fitzpatrick project, but unfortunately I've been removed. So these haven't been updated for a while, but there are 6 charts that I've produced, and I've broken them into two groups of 3. Each group will treat at the STR level of 111, 67, and 37. Today, we're just looking at one of these charts at this level here. And then I've broken them into the people in the Fitzpatrick project who have a surname Fitzpatrick, or I was very sure that they might be like Colleen, Colleen, you are Fitzpatrick, but a female who's representing. I definitely was sure that the female was representing, or the surname was representing, a Fitzpatrick ancestor. So one group, only Fitzpatricks. The second group was everyone, whatever surname they returned, and they were in the project, and they were allocated to a DNA group, in this case, FGC 5494, or these other DNA groups, and the project has allocated these haplotypes to the people in the project. So this particular chart is only the people who I was confident were Fitzpatrick. So we have 23 Fitzpatricks in this group out of a total of 54. So I went into each one of those Fitzpatricks and was able to compile a list of their matches. So 23 sets of matches for those Fitzpatricks, and then anonymized the data and produced a frequency with which surnames occurred. So once again, these are at the head of the list: Fitzpatrick, Brennan, Costigan, Fitzgerald, Brennan, all different variants of this surname. Now, take it with a grain of salt at this stage. It is well and truly out of date. There are some other names I know that have come in. So the DNA is showing via this method that there is the connection, a kindred connection between the three Ossorian surnames, Brennan, Costigan, and Fitzpatrick. The other DNA groups just don't have that showing. This next chart is where we're going to talk a bit about A1506, and we're going to talk about A1487. So if you could recall back to Tiger Walsh's chart, where he's showing how the distribution of the SNPs, and that I was pointing out that at the very bottom of the chart was A1487. I don't know if I can get back. Can I get back to that chart easily? I can. Here it is. Here it is. Okay. So here is A1487, well and truly established in Ireland. And now that puts this chart into a little bit of perspective for you. And we are going down to the present day. That's the number of SNPs that are downstream from this particular one. So if we were to allocate, let's say 40 SNPs, 70 years per SNP between mutations is, what's that quickly? Maths. 70 by 40. That's before Christ. This SNP was in a male who lived before the birth of Christ. So, and the other point to just to recap on is that this STR of DYS equals 390, returning a value of 21, does not occur until after this SNP first appears or first mutates. So now we get down to this SNP here, A1506, and I hope you can now see the pattern that occurred to me when I'm producing these sorts of charts, then producing the charts from Family Tree Maker with regard to Reverend Shearman's genealogy. And on one side we have Costigan and Fitzpatrick, and on the other side we have Brennan. Brennan occurring very quickly in the history. Costigan appearing post the flight of the Giolla Phádraigs to Upper Ossorian. And we'll see some other names, and as I said, we will get lots of different surnames pop up, but when you go to look, they have the fingerprint, they have they have the SNP and they have the STR values. But when you will look into the surname projects for Evans or for Dooley, for Gordon, for John, they are outliers within their surname projects. And it's interesting to note now, I would have said it before, but this is probably the better time to bring this in, is that we've seen presentations Maurice Gleason has hosted where, for example, the sept like O'Brien, you'll find that 50% of the people who do have the O'Brien modal or the haplotype, they won't have an O'Brien surname. And this is what we're seeing here. And it comes because it's acknowledged within the genealogy that every generation, 1 to 2% of the males that are born will have a switcher surname for whatever reason. So here we've got, as I said, a pattern that I think reinforces the history that Schumann presents. We've got geography well and truly placing these three surnames together. And we've demonstrated, I hope, that to your satisfaction, that we've got a kindred connection between these three surnames, Costigan, Fitzpatrick, and Brennan, by the sharing of yDNA. So if I move on to this next slide, and I hope I'm not going too long, but we're nearly finished. So when we go back to this slide here, a family tree DNA, they will display a graphic so that we can get a handle on it. So there's our SNP. There is the Brennan line, and here is the Fitzpatrick and Costigan line. And the common block between those two is here. I'm not going to, they call it a name, A1506, but in this instance, the common SNP between these two for this argument will be this one here. And so it was 16 SNPs under A1506. So we're going to use 16. So now we want to derive, well, we'll attempt to derive the age for 1506. We've got Schumann, who listed as numbered 74, Carol, down to Brian Og Giolla listed as 95, 21 generations. Zalewski and Fitzpatrick, 14 generations. So we've got 30 for a generation, 35. That's the number of years. I'm suggesting that's going to place A1506 back in the 900s. One of the things that, as an aside, that people do is they use 1950 as a starting point, because you can't use today, 2021, because the people who are in these genealogies, you know, they were born on average. Pick an average. It's particular. We could work it out thanks to the good work of Steve and Ronan, but a rule of thumb is that you use 1950. So we'll probably even go back a bit further than that. So then we move on to Dennis Wright, his project, and his estimate is 69 years as a mutation rate per SNPs. We use 16 SNPs, 69 years, 1120 less the rule of thumb of 1950 brings us back to 830. Now, I haven't mentioned before this, but we don't know when Carol was born, but we do have very good records of his regnal years, and we have a date of death which was 888 AD. So by using two different methods to derive the age of 1506, I'm suggesting, and I'm happy to be tested on this, but I'm suggesting that that we've shown in our presentation today that A1506 is going to be very close to Carol, or another male. Definitely a male had this SNP originally, and I'm suggesting it's going to be back in the era of Carol. And so my conclusion is that the orthodox view of the origins of the three Ossorian surnames, Brennan, Costigan, and Fitzpatrick, is supported by the evidence that is provided by history, geography, and the geography of Ossorian, and that the yDNA evidence confirms the two disciplines of history and geography, and that together these three create a nexus, which the probability of the three coming together this way is very low, and not being in the positive for my presentation is very, very low. And if you wish to be associated with this group, then you have to demonstrate these three disciplines apply. And so to be an Ossorian, Brennan, you've got to be connected with historically, geographically, and with yDNA to Costigan and Fitzpatrick. And I won't bore you, but similarly with these other the other surnames. So that's it. And thanks to these learned people, I've been able to stand on their shoulders, and I hope I haven't bored you too much today. And so it's over back to you, Ryan. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Tim. Let's give a round of applause to our man, Tim, here. Sometimes some people might find it hard to follow. Other people might be eating it up. It's tough to say how many people were able to follow exactly what he was saying, but I'll tell you right now, for me, that was extremely interesting. So let's take it to Q&A real quick. We already have a question. Karen Fitzpatrick Hall, if you'd like to, your hand is up, I see, if you'd like to ask a question.
All right. Sorry, bear with me. Several things. Tim, I sympathize with you. I'm being ousted with the FTDNA group. I also was, and it's just part of the role, I guess. So listening to you, I found it very fascinating because, as many of you already know, I'm a Dicashian Fitzpatrick, and our clan has been approved by the clans of Ireland. But Ryan and I have talked about this a couple of weeks ago. So you have the Brennans, the Fitzpatricks, and the Costigans. So, and it looks like 900 is about the time period. Again, my question is why? Why did they change their name? Why did they take that name? Are we ever going to know these answers? Why did my Fitzpatricks over in Mayo and Roscommon take the name, since we're not related to really the Ossorian, because there's 22 distinct different groups in the yDNA group. So why did all these Fitzpatricks assume the name? Was it because of St. Patrick traveling Ireland? But again, to concentrate back to what you were saying, the Brennans, the Fitzpatrick, and the Costigan, why did they take on those names? Why didn't all three of them take the name Fitzpatrick, let's say?
Okay, well, I can answer that for you, Karen. So I probably should have drawn this out a little more, but when Brian, the Lord of Upper Ossory, submitted to King Henry VIII in 2026.
39 was his submission. 41 was his elevation to the peerage.
Yep. So in that time frame, he has given away the Septs lands, which were not his to give away, by the way. They belonged to the clan, not to the head, the chief or the head of the clan. And so in that interim, he has submitted and given his land to the crown, hoping that the crown will give that land back to him, which the crown does, but only on the proviso that Brian becomes English, adopts English law, English customs, and anglicizes Giolla Phádraig, which means son or servant or follower of Patrick. That's the beginning of the surname Fitzpatrick. If you want, as a Dalcassian Fitzpatrick, to understand how you have the Fitzpatrick surname, you have to track back to the Gaelic origins that pertain to you as a Dalcassian, not as an Ossorian. I hope I've explained that.
Right, I understand.
I would also add too, Karen, just real quick. So Giolla Phádraig was a name. I mean, it was a common first name, right? Just as Brian or Neil or Noel. These were first names that, through various circumstances with different families and different lineages, as circumstance dictated, the descendants wound up taking the name of one of their forebears. And so there could be any number of Giolla Phádraigs from various lines throughout Ireland. And of those men who kind of founded various, out of all of those various Giolla Phádraigs, some of them went on to have descendants who took their first name as a surname. So it's what we would call polygenetic. You could, just like every surname in Ireland is today, all over the world, you find this. Not every O'Brien is a descendant of King Brian Boru. Brian was a common enough name that there are lots of O'Briens who come from different Brians other than Brian Boru. It's the same thing with Giolla Phádraig. So you could have potentially any number of Giolla Phádraigs who then started lines, and the name was taken in honor of them. And they weren't all necessarily from the Ossory line, but
and they won't have the DNA. What distinguishes them is the DNA. Right. And another interesting point is, which I've touched on, that surnames didn't become established in Europe till maybe, let's say, 1100. Ireland was one of the first places in which surnames became to be used. And if we look at if we look at Carol, he has a son, Brennan. There's something that happens within that family that is historic, whatever reason it might be. Hence, to be connected to Brennan, when it was a Christian name only, there were no surnames at that point, gives you credence, gives you prestige, lets the poets talk about you. Hence, Brennan as a Christian name becomes O'Brennan, grandson of the Christian name. Giolla Phádraig is the son of Giolla Phádraig. And there's a wonderful book by Paul Martin, I think it is, M-Y, not M-A-R-T-I-N, M with a Y in it. And he comes from Galway, I think. He lectures there. He explains the derivation of all this so beautifully about Dervines. My brother who's here today, he's got that book. I'd show it to you if I had it. He's sitting on it, reading it.
Tim, if you get a chance, will you send me that link?
Yeah, I would. I will.
Or if you find it.
And if you look at the Nordic traditions, they're Peterson. They're very hard to do their genealogy because they retained Christian names for so long. You look in India, your first name is your father's name, and then you're given a Christian name. These traditions are not peculiar to Ireland; they're worldwide. Okay.
All right, that's it. I'm finished. Thank you for putting up with me.
Good. Okay, and with that, I'll let our president and founder Ronan say any closing words, if you'd like.
Ring the bell.
Ring the bell.
I didn't organize any.
He lost the bell.
I didn't organise any closing words, but I'm sure everyone will agree that was a wonderful evening, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was great.
It was
great.
Fun.
Thanks to everybody. Thanks to everybody who organised it, presented, and I suppose most important of all, the people who turned up. That's without them, there is no event. It's great to see some of the old faces. I got to say that. I'm sure most people will agree with that too. But look, I'm looking forward to tomorrow already. So look, it's 1 o'clock in the morning here in Dublin, a minute after 1. It's nearly at the stage where I should be getting up.
It's the same time in Kerry.
I'm going to bed. I'm going to say good night to you all. And for what it's worth,
Okay.
today is done.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night, all.
Everybody back on the
Lunchtime in
bus.
Australia. I'm going to have a great lunch.
I have my dinner. I'm having my dinner in a few minutes.
Well done,
Good
Mike and
night,
Kate.
everyone.
Well done, Tim.
All right, you bet.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Good night.
Tomorrow.
Bye-bye.